back.
People have come back. You can see
people. Yay.
Participants. You'll see the numbers rocketing up. That's everyone who's watching. Hello, everyone. We're going to wait till you all come in. I'm just going to pretend that the whole thing is to freeze.
Oh. I've got a rubbish straight face, poker face.
Let's introduce day 2, Steve.
Yes. Hello, folks. Thanks very much for coming back to day 2 of the Locked Up Festival. We had some brilliant panels yesterday, some fantastic events, really good crack yesterday. We're going to have more fun today. So before we have our first panel, we have a few housekeeping things. Today, we'll go through what's coming up today, and then as we come to it, we'll talk about it. So our first panel, which is about to happen, and you can see the participants here, is our debut panel. And after that, we have Domestic Noir. That's right, isn't it? I'm doing this from memory. Luca will hit me, or he's got some kind of an electrode in my chair, which he operates remotely if I get something wrong. So we have the Domestic Noir panel after this, which is Craig Robertson and Erin Kelly and Abir Mukherjee and C.L. Taylor. And after that, it's the TV Heaven and TV Hell panel. Is that correct?
Yes, 6:30.
6:30. And now that panel, unfortunately, Steph McGovern, for personal reasons, has had to pull out of that. We're very sad about that. We're wishing Steph all the best, and we're sending her our best. We have Mr. Mark Billingham, who's stepping into the breach there as a moderator, and he'll be talking to Robert Crace, Megan Abbott, and Joe Spain about their TV Heaven and TV Hell. And then after that, we have one of our headline events. We have Don Winslow and Anthony Horowitz. You're going to be in conversation with BBC's Phil Williams. That's 8 to 9. And then at 9:30 to 10:30, we have Richard Osman's House of Crime with Imran Mahmood and Mark Billingham, Denise Mina, and
Shari LaPena. You were doing so well.
I was yeah, that's not bad. Now, one other wee announcement is that tomorrow we were supposed to be kicking off at 2:30 with Ayo Anatati and Martina Cole in conversation. Now, unfortunately, that event has had to be cancelled, and we're going to try and do something later in the year with Ayo and Martina. So we wish all our panelists the best, and we're going to try and pick that up again later in the year. We'll try and do it as a free event or something. But unfortunately, that event has been cancelled. So the first event tomorrow will be the 4 o'clock. Is it 4 or 5 o'clock?
4 o'clock.
World's Worst Book Events. Is that it?
Yes, that's the one.
We're kicking off tomorrow with me, Nat Maniac, Adrian McKinty, Linwood Barkley, and S.J. Watson. We'll be talking crap for you. So without further ado, we'll introduce. Luca, do you want to introduce Mr. Vaseem Khan?
Yeah, that's Vaseem Khan down there. Look at him.
There he is.
There he is.
Look at him. Also the Inspector Chopra series, and he's going to lead you through this panel. We're going to say goodbye. And
we'll say bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, guys. Hello, everybody. So, as Luca so eloquently put it, my name is Vaseem Khan. I'm your panel chair for what promises to be an event so exciting that seasoned festival goers have run out of superlatives to describe it. At any rate, usually at this point, I would be talking about fire alarms and where the toilets are. But if you don't know where the toilets are in your own house, then I really cannot help you. So the format, we'll talk for about 45 odd minutes with the panelists. And then if you want to, we'll have some time at the end for questions. And if you want to ask questions, there's a Q&A button down there, and you can stick the questions in there, and we'll start trawling through them towards the end. The other thing I should tell you is that if you want to buy any of the books of any of us on this panel, Waterstones are doing a discount. All you have to do is go onto the Waterstones website, onto the Lockup Festival page, use the promo code, which is Locked Up, and you will get a whopping 25% off. So you really can't do much better than that. Okay, so I have my mango and passion fruit smoothie at the ready. So let's introduce our panelists. Let's dive straight in. We have on the panel today Nadine Matheson. Do correct my pronunciation of your names, guys.
You've got it correct.
I got it correct. She's the author of the D.I. Angelica Henley series. In her day job, she's a solicitor, specializing in criminal law for the last 14 years. She's from Southeast London, the setting for a crime series. She also happens to be a massive comic book geek, like myself, and Batman's biggest fan. Her debut is called The Jigsaw Man. Then we have Lloyd Otis, a former contributor to Huffington Post UK and the bookseller and the books editor of What's Up, What's On magazine. His debut novel, Deadlands, was selected for Bloody Scotland's Crime in the Spotlight before its scheduled release date. And he's appeared at Crime Fest and Bouchercon. His debut, as I said, is called Deadlands. S.A. Cosby, a.k.a. Sean, because he's a friend of ours, is an award-winning author from southeastern Virginia who managed to get onto this panel because his partner woke him up 5 seconds before the event because he forgot that we're on English. And anyway, he's here now, so all is well. His fiction has appeared in numerous magazines and anthologies. His short story, The Grass Beneath My Feet, was given an Anthony Award for Best Short Story. His debut is called Blacktop Wasteland and has already generated enormous press, highlighted as one of the best books of the summer by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, BuzzFeed, Pop Sugar, New York Post, and we've just heard that he's also going to be featured in Time magazine. When he isn't writing, he's an avid collector of swords and knives. We'll talk about that later, Sean. And one day dreams of owning a 67 Chevelle. So guys, for those of you who don't know me, and I know there's people from all around the world here today, my name is Vaseem Khan. I write 2 series set in India, one set in modern India called the Baby Ganesh Agency series, and a new series set in 1950, just after independence, Indian independence, the assassination of Gandhi, and that's called the Malabar House series, and it features India's first female police inspector, Persis Wadia, and it's that lovely looking orange cover there. Okay, enough about me. Let's get down to the real stars of the show. So guys, I thought what we'd do is we'd start by diving straight into your book. So if you could give us the elevator pitch, the 1-minute pitch about your debuts. Nadine, let's start with you.
I knew you were going to start with me. So, right. So the Jigsaw Man starts when body parts wash up on the banks of the River Thames, and Detective Inspector Angelica Henley sees them off to investigate, and she discovers that there's not just one victim, there's 2 victims, and that the murders matches the MO of the notorious serial killer, or Peter Olivier, aka the Jigsaw Killer. She has to go to the Jigsaw Killer for help. However, he's not too keen on helping her, and he actually escapes from prison. And the question is, who will catch the copycat first? Will it be Angelica Henley, or will it be the Jigsaw Killer? And that is the Jigsaw Man.
Thank you. Lloyd?
My book is set in the past, and it's about a city high flyer accused of murder, goes on a run to protect his dangerous secrets. He has an alibi he can't use. And then what we have is a detective, Arlo Breck, who wants to catch him, but everyone's telling him it's not this guy. All the evidence points to this guy, but you know, people are trying to tell him different things. So what we have there is quite a complex scenario of, if you like, a window into these people's lives, where this city high flyer is up to no good, but we don't know if he really is who he says he is. We don't know why Breck is being sent to other places when he's trying to find him. You know, so it's quite a complex journey into the 70s.
Yeah, thank you. Sean?
Blacktop Wasteland tells the story of Beauregard Bug Montage, a former getaway driver who settled down with his wife and children and started his own auto repair business. However, financial difficulties with the business, medical bills with his terminally ill mother, and the dreams and hopes and dreams of his children pressed him back into the proverbial cliche one last job. However, it's also about Bug's relationship with the past, with his missing father who disappeared after a pivotal moment in his life, and his journey to decide who he is. Is he Beauregard, family man and business owner, or is he Bug, ruthless criminal and getaway driver? And how those 2 identities clash again and again. Right. There's a lot of fast driving in there too.
There is a lot of fancy cars as well. Well, I have read all 3 of them. And, you know, not only are they terrific books and thoroughly recommended by me, but they are, what was noticeable is that they're all written in different styles. So there's something there for any kind of crime reader. let's find out a little bit about you, who you are and where you grew up. So Sean, I mean, clearly you're not from Britain, so tell us a bit about Virginia and where you've grown up. Is that where you've grown up?
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe y'all can tell I'm not from England. Such a surprise. Yeah, I grew up in southeastern Virginia in a very rural, as we like to say over here in the States, very country setting. I grew up with my mother and my father, who separated at an early age from me, not an early age for them. And I grew up in a pretty poverty-stricken town. I didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 16, so I'm 45 now, so do the math. But I grew up with a family who loved to tell stories, who were great comedians and orators around the dinner table. And my mother and my grandmother inspired in me a love of reading. Eventually, I was challenged by my mom because I didn't like the way a book ended to write my own story since I was so smart. And I think that was a sort of insult. But anyway, I started writing right after high school and didn't get published till about 12 years ago. And my first publication was a short story in an American crime magazine called Thug Lit. And from there, I published short stories in several different magazines and anthologies. In 2019 and last year, I was awarded a short story award at BoucherCon for my short story, The Grass Beneath My Feet, which was published in an American crime magazine called Tough Magazine. If you get a chance to check Tough out, it's a really great publication. Eventually, I was crazy enough to try to write a novel, and some of my friends suggested that I write something from my perspective, from my background, kind of incorporate that into the book. And eventually, that book became Blacktop Wasteland. I was actually, it's funny, the way Blacktop Wasteland got published, I was at BoucherCon 2018 trying to promote a smaller book that I had, and I was on a panel about Southern crime fiction, American Southern crime fiction. And of course, that talks about, the American South's history, Civil War, race, so on and so forth. And at the end of the panel, a person got up and said, well, I have a comment. I don't really have a question. And I knew, I was like, well, here we go. And so whenever somebody says, I have a comment, not a question, buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride. And so she basically complained that, how can I put this? She was a little wary of diversity. And so I, in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, offered to help her deal with diversity. I said, I can teach you how to deal with this. I mean, my people have been suffering for 400 years. So you and I will work together. We'll work through this. And everybody laughed and she left. And a gentleman that was in the audience approached me later on. And he said, my name is Josh Getchler and I'm an agent and I'd like to work with you. And 6 months later, Blacktop Wasteland sold to Flatiron Books, an imprint of Macmillan Publishing. And it comes out in 2 weeks.
That's absolutely brilliant. We'll talk a little bit more about race issues later on and diversity, because I think it's important that we tackle it. Nadine, where did you grow up and how did you end up getting published?
Well, I grew up where the Jigsaw Man is set. So I grew up in Deptford in southeast London. My parents are from Grenada in the Caribbean, and that was my family. It's very close and family, and from a very young age, I loved books. So I was always in the library. I mean, I would steal my parents' library cards and use their library cards so I can get extra books out from the library. So I grew up in Deptford, and even our community, very multicultural community, very close. All the kids who grew up here, we all went to school together, and we're still friends now, and I would consider some of them family. So I went to university, became a lawyer, and I specialise in criminal law, so I've been doing that for 14 years. And everyone asks me if the Jigsaw Man's based on any of my cases. And no, I've never represented a serial killer. And this sounds really odd, but I would have liked to have represented a serial killer. But I haven't actually represented a serial killer. But I have used probably little bits of the cases in my book. And all of the locations where the body parts are found in the Jigsaw Killer, they are real places. So if you ever decide you want to go on a tour with me one day, I may show you where.
Well, authenticity does shine through in your book. Clearly, you know procedure, and you know how cases are constructed and how investigations unfold. Yeah. So that really shone through.
I think that was important to me, because I didn't want anyone I know to come back to me and say, "You got that wrong. You got that completely wrong." So I made sure that, I tried to keep it as authentic as I could.
Did you find it easy to get published with the book? Did a heckler in the audience help you out? Or?
Unfortunately, no. But I wrote the book. I was doing a creative writing MA at City University back in 2018, and part of the course was you had to write a book. And so I finished the book September 2018, and then in November they sent extracts out in an anthology to agents. So November 2018 it went out to agents, and then I signed with my agent Ollie Munson from AM Heath in January of last year. And then it all speeds up very, very quickly, because I went into a 6 publisher auction by middle of February of last year, and I signed with HQ end of February, beginning of March.
Okay. You know that as soon as people hear the word auction, you're probably going to have friends and relatives asking you where the Ferrari is parked, and because that's what people think. That's what people think authors' lives are like. You know, you get your first book out the door, published, and all of a sudden you're moving into a castle like J.K. Rowling. But
my godchildren already think I'm rich. They're convinced. They're convinced I'm rich. But no, definitely not.
Brilliant. Lloyd, how about you? What's your journey been like?
Well, I grew up in Battersea. Not the Battersea we know now, the Battersea then. You know, so now there's a lovely restaurants, there's lovely bars. Back then, the poshest thing we had was fish and chip shop. You know, and I remember.
You're lucky.
Van. It was the people. The ice cream van comes. You run to your parents. You say, "Money for the ice cream," and you've got a timed moment. You know, you got like a timed moment. And many times I ran down the steps just before this guy goes away. So, and you know, get your ice cream. You jump on your bikes. And you'd be riding, and you think you go to another country when actually you've just gone 10 minutes down the road. But when it's like a whole new environment. So that was sort of my life growing up. And I sort of went to uni, done a media degree. And I remember we had a visit by Express, a publisher that used to be around in the UK back in the day. And, you know, I sort of had the writing bug there. And it sort of gave me some insight into publishing. And then, but what I wanted to do it properly. So I took the traditional approach, and I joined up with a local writing group. My tutor was 80 years old. And it's the type of writing group that you go in there and it's like, right, you've got 10 minutes to write something. And my face was like, what do you mean 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. I was a bit shy. So I was like, fine, I've got 10 minutes. I can redraft later on, it's fine, no problem. 10 minutes gone. Right, stand up, read it out. Read it out? Read it out. Really makes you, when you have this, you know, look, I've been on the online ones as well, but there's no substitute for the face-to-face interactions. It's just, you know, it really makes you understand that writing is a creative art. It's an expression of self. You know, so once I got that, I felt really confident to say, right, let me put something down. So, you know, I put something down, tried to did send out to some agents, got rejected. As it goes, everyone's been feeling, you know, it's like most people. And then somewhere along that, I sent off to a publisher. I don't know why, but I did. And guess what? I heard nothing. Okay. Editor, get on with it, you know, and you plan for the next one. And then if I'm right on this, about a year later, and I'll repeat that, a year later, I got a call out of the blue. And I think it was a call on a Friday. And I sort of said, it's a wind-up. I think it's a wind-up. I said, look, you know, I'm going to think about it. And I actually took the weekend to think about it. You know, publisher loved the book, thought it's right for the moment. But I said, no, I'm going to think about it. I just didn't believe it. Yeah, it came back the Monday, sorted it out. And it went really quick then. As you mentioned in the intro, the Bloody Scotland thing came up where you could submit to it. And I had this dream that turned into a nightmare because the dream that turned into a nightmare, I'd missed the deadline. And I woke up that morning thinking, oh, I'm so silly. I wrote this down. No, I didn't. But when I checked the calendar, the deadline hadn't come yet. It was just a nightmare. I'm like, do you know what? That's a sign. Send it. So I did. And then they picked me to be on the spotlight. So that's fantastic. It was a great experience. when we do rehearsals, you sort of go upstairs to see the books. My book wasn't there yet because it hadn't come out yet. So everyone's books were there. So I was like, all right. And then we did the rehearsals, and then we went on stage, done the thing. And I'm walking upstairs behind Craig Russell, the author. Now, I'm going to be sitting next to him. Craig's going to be signing his books. I haven't got nothing to sign. What am I going to do? So we went upstairs. Lo and behold, I saw Deadlands. I'm like, oh, man, that's great. And I saw the girl from Waterstones. I said, look, they're coming good time. She sort of said, it was close. It was close. How close? She went 30 minutes. So I was like,
wow.
That's close. But, these things happen. But it was great. It was a great experience. And then,
can I ask you, why did you pick historical crime? Because the 1970s, technically, I think 40 years previously counts as historical crime.
Is it?
Roughly. That's what I've heard.
Just, someone said to me, do you know what? I'll tell you why. It's a very good story on this one, because I had the concept of the 70s, and I thought, you know what? Platform shoes, ABBA, the shirts, vibe. I said, I can do that. But it wasn't so. It was quite bleak. And I'm telling you this, it was quite bleak. And then I had a chat with my uncle, and he was sort of saying, we were talking about the Battle of Lewisham. I said, what's that? He said, there's a Battle of Lewisham. He was a school child at the time, and he was there. Now, can you imagine that? You're actually there. So I could get a taste for the atmosphere and everything. Just tell me about this. And the far right were coming from Lewisham to New Cross, going to be met by the anti-fascists. And it was a big moment nationally where the old people were told, stay at home or leave. So I thought, do you know what? This is really powerful. It's really big. It's too big. It'll take over the whole story, because my story is about a city high flyer accused of murder, goes on a run to protect a dark secret. But I said, if I have this at a backdrop, knowing what I know now about the 70s and how actually there were some good parts, but there were some bad parts, I think that will serve as a good backdrop to what the climate was. And that sort of cemented my pathway into the 70s, and I really worked hard to try and get rid of research. And a lot of people go through this when you do your debut. You want to put it all out there. And it was very difficult to find someone from the 70s. I worked really hard to get a copper that was serving. It was really hard work. But this guy came on, he was telling me about how he used to do policing. And there's a scene in the book where you got a pathologist comes in and he looks at the body. And that's really based about the conversation I had, where, he told me, look, there's a pathologist came in, he wanted to see what was going to get later on, and he just walked back out. And I put that in, and people can't believe it. I said, this is true. So there's a lot of policing's changed years later in terms of the rules that they have to abide by, so to speak. But back then it was just, you could do a lot and get away with it, put it that way. So, yeah.
Let's talk a bit about your inspirations. Let's start with you, Sean. So, your work will, like every other author's work, be compared to previous writers who've been successful. And certainly when I read your book, I immediately begin to think of writers who write muscular crime novels in that American mold. Who are your inspirations?
I think my first two inspirations for Blacktop Wasteland, or my first two inspirations as a writer, are the American writer Walter Mosley.
Yeah.
The writer. Yeah, I love Walter Mosley. He's an incredible author who raises crime. Yeah, and Devil in Blue Dress blew me away. And so he raises crime fiction to an art form. I'm not saying I do that, but that's the high bar I was trying to reach. But also the American author Dennis Lehane is a huge inspiration. He's a great master of dialogue, and uniquely a dialogue of a certain class, of a certain type, of a certain place. And I was trying to aim for that. But I think those are my two most linear inspirations. But I take inspiration from all types of authors, because I love reading all types of fiction, not just crime fiction, but all types of fiction. I love English fiction. In America, we call it the drawing room house, like Dorothy L. Sayers and Agatha Christie and writers like that, or Colin Dexter was a big influence. The Inspector Morse series, not so much because that's a police procedural and I'm writing a crime novel, but there's a certain sensibility in Colin's work of duality, of trying to toe that line between the good and bad sides of yourself, that I find quite appealing. So those were mainly most of my inspirations. And also American film, a lot of American film in the 70s. There was a genre of American film in the 1970s that was called country noir. And it was a lot of movies set in the rural South, and they were crime movies. And I think Burt Reynolds was in all of them. But those were a huge inspiration for me. I remember sitting on the couch watching those with my grandfather and my uncle. And even though, you know, we were black and Burt Reynolds was a white man, there was a sense of almost camaraderie in those movies, because a lot of times they were about a poor man being beset by forces beyond his control. And so that really was a connection for us. And so all of those things came together to inspire Black Child Wasteland.
Fantastic. And one of the things that immediately struck me was how cinematic your book is. You can easily see that it's being transferred to screen at a relatively low expense and done very, very well. And I think that's, you know, some of the factors that feed into whether or not a book actually ends up on screen is how easy it can be.
We just sold film rights a month ago, so hopefully we'll see it on screen soon. Thank you.
Brilliant. Nadine, your inspirations?
James Ellroy, American Tabloid. That was I think that was the book that made me want to write crime, and I can't remember when I read it. It's like very early 2000s. I was working in a bookshop part-time. I was working at books, etc. And I read it, and it was I just never seen words, sentences are well constructed the way that he does. And I remember thinking, I want to write like him, but there's no way I can write like him, because he's just like, he's completely out of this world. So James Ellroy he was definitely the author that made me think I want to write crime. But generally, I mean, Mark Billingham's been a really big inspiration to me in terms of writing crime fiction. And then also you mentioned at the beginning that I'm a comic book geek, and I am Batman.
Well, to me, Batman was an inspiration.
Well, Batman's a detective, so people need to remember that. So he's a detective. But the thing about it's not just Batman, it's also the Joker. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent. It makes sense, but it made me think about how you construct characters, especially when it comes to villains and the very different layers that will make up a villain. So I said my inspiration for writing crime is it's very, very varied, but definitely James Ellroy.
We have a question for you, Nadine. We might as well take one or two of these if they're relevant. What made you pick the title of the book?
Oh, when I first qualified as a solicitor, so this was about 14 years ago, and I think the summer I qualified, there was a case where body parts were just found scattered along the A2. And they did refer to the victim as the Jigsaw Man because no one knew. And that was the very first case I remember. That's always stuck in my head. So when I had to come up with a title. I mean, the book came out of an assignment that we had to do for the creative writing masters, where we had to write an opening chapter on suspense. And I just called it The Jigsaw Man, and that's where it came from. But yeah, The Jigsaw Man did come from a real case about 14 years ago.
And it is relevant, of course, because of the rather gruesome nature of the serial killer's modus operandi. Goes around killing people.
You call it gruesome, it's just lying.
Gruesome is a good thing in crime fiction.
I know, it's great.
Lloyd, your inspirations?
Quite and far-reaching, really. Similar to what Sean and Nadine says, I read a lot of non-fiction, and I really enjoy some of that. Walter Mosley, Elmo Leonard as well. I find some of these things are on point, especially where Deadline's set in the 70s. He does a lot of stuff around that period. And I'm a bigger comic geek than both of you two.
I know.
Out there.
I've got 30-year-old copies of X-Men.
Oh,
I'll beat you.
That's that way. The comics as well was a big thing for me growing up, reading a lot of comics. And definitely when I went to take crime and thriller writing seriously, I looked at people like Mark Billingham, Ian Rankin, Val, just to see how they put things together and how it flows. So it's not just one area. I think it's far-reaching. And I think that's a good way to sort of get an understanding of what the writing process is about.
Okay, brilliant. Right, guys, I'm going to take us in a more serious direction. We're going to tackle the elephant in the room. It can't have escaped anyone's notice that you are 3 black authors, and I'm a person of color as well. I could ignore this. You know, I've spoken at more festivals than I can recall now, and if there were 3 white panelists, we wouldn't even mention it. However, given how unbelievably rare it is, and given what's going on in the world right now following the murder of George Floyd, I felt that it would be apt to take the bull by the horns and talk a little bit about race in the publishing industry. It's a topic close to my heart anyway. I've been around for about 6 years since I was published, and I've had very, very positive experiences, but I know that there are lots of unconscious barriers that have existed for a long time now. So let's talk a little bit about this without hopefully distracting people from the fact that clearly you're here to talk about your books as well. So do wrap up some of the stuff, because it comes through in your books as well, not least because of your characters. So Sean, on your Twitter feed, you urge readers to, and I quote, read about a world that isn't often represented in crime fiction, and that's rural Black America. We live, you say, in the former Confederacy. It takes an uncommon amount of strength to do so. So they're very strong words. Could you explain the strength of feeling behind that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a small town where in the center of town, there's a statue dedicated to Confederate soldiers, men who, if they could come forward 150 years in the future, would want to put me in chains. And so to live in the shadow of that and still try to be a viable, normal, strong human being is an incredible challenge. You know, I think that people oftentimes forget, especially in America, that the South is not your stereotypical quote unquote redneck country boy. It's a multitude of cultures and races that are forced to come together and live on the land that was, you know, stolen from one people, indigenous Americans, and built by another people, kidnapped African Americans. And so as an author, especially as a crime author, it behooves me to talk about it in my books. Hopefully I talk about it in a way that is compelling, but not overburdening or heavy-handed. You know, Stephen King says, doesn't matter what you're trying to write about if the story isn't good. So I definitely story first, and you know, spoonful of honey makes the medicine go down, so to speak.
Well, I mean, if people read your book, that's one of the things that strikes you immediately. Although the lead character is a Black character, Beauregard, Bug, the people that he's dealing with in this rural Southern community, they are white people, lots of them, and some of them are white lowlifes, and some of them are also lowlifes, but of a richer disposition. So, you know, you've brought all of that together, and, you know, the issues of race are intermingled with the issues of class and who has access to wealth and opportunity in that novel. And that's what comes through so strongly in the narrative, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, I'd like to say I'm a huge comic book fan. I will challenge your title as the biggest comic book fan, because I have the complete run of Fabian Nicizia's Punisher series. So just take that for what it's worth.
I think there's going to be a Hunger Games scenario now. So you're the only one who could. We've got to ask you, why do you collect swords and knives? So we've got to ask you this.
I wanted to. This is very, very embarrassing, but when I was 9 years old, I saw the movie The Mask of Zorro, the old version with Frank Langella, and I wanted to learn fencing, but there's no fencing instructor in my small town. B, we didn't have the money for it. And so my uncle, in what I thought at the time was a joke, but he told me later he was totally serious, he got me a sword and was like, go practice. So at 9 years old, and I still have it, I had a saber, a real saber with a real blade, and I was in my backyard just hacking away at trees and branches. But I rented a book from the library, and I figured out early on that fencing was really hard, and I wasn't very good at it. But it blossomed a love of swords and knives and daggers in me, and currently I have over 250 swords and daggers that my partner makes me keep in the shed out back. I can't keep them in the house. So,
Nadine, so you write in your debut. So this is about Angelica, the lead character, who is black. She knew from experience that sometimes the black community were reluctant to report crimes or members of their family who were missing. It was a belief that the media didn't care enough, that the usual stereotypes and negative images of black people meant that there was a bias towards reporting the disappearance of a blonde, blue-eyed white girl instead of a black woman. Now that obviously is a very challenging statement and will make a lot of people uncomfortable. Were you worried about making readers uncomfortable? Was your editor worried?
No, and the truth is, I didn't even think about it when I wrote it. Because the thing is, when it's your truth, when it's something you see every day, you're not going to question it. And it didn't come up when my agent read it. It didn't come up when my editor has been through it multiple times through editing. It's just never been an issue. My thing is that if you read it, I don't even think it doesn't matter what colour you are, whether you're black or white. If you read that paragraph and it's making you uncomfortable, then really it should prompt you to ask the question, why is it making you uncomfortable? And the thing when it comes to racism, especially in this current climate, and I think a lot of people are learning, is that a lot of the racism that we would experience as black and Asian people, a lot of it is very nuanced and very subtle. It's not always the in your face, someone's calling you the N-word, for example. It's very, very subtle. I mean, my name's Nadine Matheson. Nadine's French and Matheson's Scottish. So if they see my name on an application form, they're not expecting someone like me to walk through the door. And you have that subtle moments when they're like, you get a look across their face and it's like, oh. So, I can jest about it, but in truth, so when I wrote that, it's true. Because when I have seen, for example, black children go missing, for example, the publicity is not there. Any searches, any publicity is very much done on social media. And it's only when there's some reason for it to be high profile is where you'll see it magnified. So to me, if you read that question, you read that paragraph and you feel a way about it, you need to ask yourself why you're feeling a way about it. And hopefully that will probably lead on to a wider conversation.
Fantastic. We do have a very valid comment from Louise Colvin, who is tuned in, and she says that the same sort of prejudices, whether they unconscious or not, apply to people with disabilities and wider small groupings of people who are not part of the mainstream publishing culture. But Lloyd, let's move on to you. So in your book, again, which is set in 1977, a completely different time, so we do have to be aware of that, you tackle race relationships head on. A white victim at some point has a relationship with a black gardener, Benjamin, and he is arrested and beaten up by a white cop, a racist cop, who uses the word coon in your book. You use the word coon. Did you struggle with yourself before deciding to put that word into print, thinking that perhaps it might cause offense? People would not take it for the way that it was written, which was to display exactly how people behaved?
No, not really. You can't change history. And I was on a mission to depict as much as possible exactly how it was at that time. The truth of the matter is, I was probably lied because it was horrendous. There were things on TV that was just seen as the norm, So it wasn't a struggle for me to put that in. I thought, if we're talking about this guy, Benjamin, and also remember my debut has been out now 1 or 2 years, and that particular scene is quite interesting because Benjamin actually says, when he's getting harassed by Ray Riley, the racist cop, he actually says, Ray Riley pushes down on his windpipe and he's actually sort of struggling to breathe. And I read that and I thought, hang on, but that's set in the 70s. It shouldn't be 2020. We're still talking about things like that now. And that's where it gets worrying. You think, we've still got some way to go on that. But I think you're talking about the 70s, you're talking about that period, and I mentioned earlier, the window into these people's lives. You've got to be true to it. In the backdrop of this, as I said, you had the Battle of Lewisham, the first time I think the UK police used riot shields on UK mainland. Then you've got to be true to that. Although you're providing entertainment, you still got to build the proper picture. So for me, I don't think words should be put in there just for effect, but if it serves a purpose of what's going to go on, I couldn't have Ray Riley, for instance, arresting Benjamin and saying, You all right, Benji? Yeah, you all right? Your cuffs on too tight, you know? Oh, guys, make sure you know. You all right? Sorry, I'm going to take you to... No, because I've been building up until that point that Ray Riley's he's a nasty piece of work. So when we get to that point where, and to be honest with you, Breck, without giving anything away, Breck sort of arrives on the scene. If he didn't, you know, you're reading that, you're thinking, well, I know what's going to happen here. It's not going to be nice. So, you know, I think there's an element of being true. Look, would I write something again exactly like I've written Deadlands? Probably not as a day, because you mature as a writer, and there's certain things you sort of turn around and change. But as I said, I really wanted to get it on point as much as possible at that moment.
Brilliant. Well, the first thing to say is all of your books are good crime novels, you know, or good thrillers and crime novels. So regardless of whether anyone takes away any message about race from them, that's not the reason you should be reading these books. You should be reading them because they're just good crime novels. I mean, I talk quite a lot about the publishing industry and race, because when I came in about 6 years ago, there was maybe one, maybe two other people of color who were reasonably well known as crime writers in Britain. And that hasn't really changed a lot. There's more, but there's still not wide acclaim for people who come in from a different background. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago where I quoted somebody who'd done some research in America and for Harvard University, and what she found was that a lot of this is to do with a phenomenon called comping white, or comparing white. What that means is that the publishing industry, it may not be a case of people being racist or prejudiced. The way that they choose new books to publish is by comparing them to books that have already been successful. So they're always looking for the next Harry Potter. They're always looking for the next, Gone Girl. But because 98% of the books that are currently published and are successful are by white authors writing about white protagonists, it means that automatically the data is skewed. And so they buy more white books because those are the ones that sold previously. They promote white books because those are the ones that were successful before, which means that it becomes a vicious circle. The only way to break out of that circle is for readers to give the signal and say, we're not going to be put off by, and I put in quotes because somebody said this before, a funny sounding name on the cover or protagonists who don't share our own cultural identity. Readers are the only ones who can make the industry say, because it's no point changing the editors if they're still looking at the same data, because even editors of color will still say, will be stopped from publishing different types of books because the people above them will say, well, the data doesn't support you publishing Lloyd Otis because we're only going to sell 5 copies of his book. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to get on my hopes about it, but I wrote a piece. I'll probably stick this piece up. It's on my website for people to read, because I think the more people that read it, the more readers that can be convinced to experiment and branch out and try books by people of color and protagonists, more importantly. If Harry Potter were not a white protagonist, would it really detract from the story a great deal? That's the question that readers should ask themselves. If they're engrossed by a good book, it shouldn't really matter, except if it's very specific to that particular tale that you're trying to tell. So, for instance, Bug could not be a white guy. He has to be a black guy because of the tale that you're trying to tell. Anyway,
I think one of the big things about reading in general is that it opens your mind to worlds that you wouldn't normally experience. I mean, whether you're reading Harry Potter or Tolkien, or whether you're reading Elmore Leonard or Chester Himes, whatever you're reading, hopefully it's a new world to you, a new experience. And like you said, it's hard to break through that barrier as a writer of color sometimes. I got a lot of rejections for a book I wrote one time, and the main thing, they were like, well, you need to make it blacker, and by blacker they meant more drugs, more violence, and in a different setting. They wanted it set in Chicago and New York. Well, that's not my experience. I write about the experience I had growing up in the South, and so, like you said, those issues of race and class definitely come into it. But at the end of the day, I hope that people read a book like Nadine's, like Lloyd, like mine, for story, but also through that story, learn something about a community or a culture that maybe they wouldn't normally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I remember when we went to Bouchercon, which is in Florida, which is a Republican state, right? And I tell you what, I mean, people were interested in the book. You know, I remember someone saying to me, "I don't put it in the bookshop, no one's going to buy it. Don't put it in the bookshop." You know what? I said, "All right, let's just do it. Put it in the bookshop, they were all gone." You know, so people will want the stories. You know, you go in the supermarket, you'll buy what's in the supermarket. You know, so you need to put in, people are not going to say, oh, that's new, I'm not going to buy it. They will buy it. And I think, you know, if I wake up tomorrow and I say, oh, do you know what? I'm going to do cozy crime. I'm going to sell it in a village, you know? Why can't I do that? You know, I'm going to do a very good cozy crime, you know? Things we need to look at.
I mean, look, I'm not having a go at Harry Potter at all because, you know, it's a fantastic series and done very, very well. My point was only to say that, you know, if protagonists were of different backgrounds, it shouldn't really affect how good the story is. If it's a bad story, it's a bad story, as I think, Sean, you said it earlier, or Lloyd, you may have said it. If it's a good story, then it's going to appeal to everybody if they're willing to approach it with an open mind. Let's tackle some of the questions now before we close in 10 minutes. So let me just look through some of the Q&A. So Fiona asks, what are Nadine, Lloyd and Sean reading right now? So very quickly, what book would you recommend to people that you're reading?
I've just started reading Jacobs Ross, Black Rain Falling. And that's really good. So I literally just started that this morning, so that's what I'm reading now.
Okay, brilliant.
I'm actually halfway through Adrian McGinty's The Chain, to be honest with you.
Okay,
and I've got The Lock Artist. Based on a conversation Sean done online, I've got that book, The Lock Artist. So yeah, I mean that's next on my list.
Yeah, well, Adrian may even be listening because he tweeted that he was going to tune in. And for those of you who don't know, Adrian, he wrote a wonderful series of books set in Ireland, where he's from. But then things went sideways, you know, because of factors within the industry. And then he had this brilliant story of Don Winslow picking up something that he'd written and putting him onto his agent, and then his agent managed to get him a fantastic deal for The Chain, which I've read. And if you're looking for a really good fast-paced thriller, The Chain is fantastic, and now it's been sold to a big Hollywood studio and will shortly end up on our screen. So, you know, fantastic story for all of those who are maybe disheartened a little bit by struggling along in the industry. Adrian is a fantastic example of what can be achieved if you keep at it. Sean, what have you?
I'd like to give. I just finished a book called Cottonmouths by Kelly J. Ford. It's a Southern rural noir crime thriller that takes place in Arkansas. The protagonist is an LGBTQ woman who finds herself falling in love with her childhood best friend, who may or may not have nefarious designs on her. It's an incredibly powerful book. Again, a world that maybe I wouldn't know or be familiar with immediately. And so I really want to give that book a shout out. I just finished it and it just stays with me. Also, if anybody wants to read a really great example of American, what I like to call rural Gothic work, there's a book called The Devil All the Time by Donald Lee Pollock. It takes place in 1950s West Virginia and Ohio, and it's a remarkable deconstruction of that time period and the sensibilities that go along with it, and how a lot of times crime is not what you do, crime is just what happens to you and how you react to it.
Absolutely. Where can people get signed copies of your books?
Oh, I don't know yet. Mine's not out until next March, so I'll let you know. Just stay in touch with me and I'll let you know.
What was the hardest thing about writing your debut?
Work.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say work, because when I said I was doing mine as part of the creative writing MA, and you know, I had a day job, so I was still going to court, and I also teach law as well. So I was teaching classes, marking exam papers, and then trying to get this book done. And that, I think, just trying to balance everything all together was probably the hardest part of writing the book. The editing process is, I like. I know I'm odd. I do, but I do.
You are odd. Lloyd?
I think for me, not knowing whether or not to stick to the rules. You know, I was very adventurous back in those days. You know, it's like, I'm not going to, do I want to stick with them? So that was sort of a back and forth thing all the way. But, you know, because, you know, when you do the first draft, there's this amazing buzz, and you think, yeah. And, you know, by the time you sort of get further down the line, it changes quite a lot. But yeah, that was one of the things that was keep buzzing around for me. Do I stick to it?
Sure.
I think for me, the hardest thing was this deciding how far to go with certain aspects of the book. There's quite a lot of violence in Blacktop Wasteland, but the version that you read, the version that's coming out, is toned down a little bit. It was way more violent in the initial edit than the first draft. And so it was really deciding. I always want violence to mean something, and I always want violence to have consequences in my writing. And so but there was also scenes where I could tell that I was doing it because it was fun, and I was doing things because I wanted to do them, not necessarily because the character would have done them. And so that was something I had to pull back on. Also, you can get signed copies of my book in August from Headline publishers. They're going to be releasing it in the UK, and please buy the signed copies, because they sent me these little book plate things to sign, and there was like 800 of them. So my hand for like 2 weeks, it looked like Dr. Hook's claw. So if you would sign those, it would make my sacrifice worth something. So
okay, fantastic. A question for myself from Louise Colvin. Why is there an elephant in your books? Where's the inspiration come from? So for those of you who don't know, my first series set in modern Mumbai had the lead inspector was a serious guy solving murders and whatnot. He inherits a baby elephant that he has to look after. Yeah, I mean, the elephant's just a metaphor for India, for a symbol. It doesn't fly or talk or anything. But the reason for it is that there was an elephant. I lived in India for 10 years, and there was an elephant living very close by to where I was. And that was fascinating to me, having grown up in the UK. I'd never been to India before. My parents were from there. It was just incredible to see an elephant outside of a circus in the road wandering around. But it became a bit of a character within the series. So that's the answer.
I'm glad you answered that as well. I'm glad you
Writing and drafting takes time. Or would you? Oh well, I don't know. This is a bit personal. This one it's talking about. Would you say that you earn more than minimum wage per hour from your writing? I probably don't have to answer that. That's probably a bit too personal to be. You don't want the tax man chasing you. So.
But I know a lawyer. If you do.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's talk about what you're writing next, because this is just the first stage in what we hope are going to be really, really good long careers.
I was going to say this is a nice break for me, because I'm currently working on book 2 of the Angelica Henley series. So she's investigating another series of murders. I have a murder of a pastor. So they've just found a dead body in a church, and there's some other bodies that they're going to find later on. So that's currently what I'm working on.
You know what it should be called, right? Because if the first one's the Jigsaw Man, then it should be another board game or something. The Cluedo Man or the chess Scrabble Man. The Scrabble Man. There you go.
The Monopoly Killer.
10% for me.
Oh, we'll do the Monopoly Killer.
That's not too bad. That's not too bad. Lloyd?
Everyone gets killed with a different game piece. But anyway.
I'm keep it short and sweet. I've sort of moved away from the 70s now. For now, funny enough, I listened to Val's session yesterday where I think a new book's going to be set in the 70s. So maybe I was a little bit ahead of the curve. But my one is now a bit more contemporary, and I just finished it actually. So yeah, it's about friendships. It's about secrets and how far those friendships can be tested. How far you can push the boundaries before people start changing. So I'm really about that one. And then after that, because you should plan, I'm starting to look at what's next after that, which I haven't got any idea yet on that. So yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay, fair enough. What about you, Sean?
I just finished, and I'm in the process of doing the revisions on a revenge novel set in the South, surprise, about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose sons were married and were murdered in what appears to be an LGBTQ hate crime. But these two men decide to investigate the crime themselves because they feel like the police are dragging their feet because it involved the murders of gay men. And they also are trying to get revenge for their sons, but also trying to redeem themselves because neither one of them were very accepting of their son's sexuality. And so they had a very strained and sometimes even violent relationship with their children. And so this is a tale of redemption for them, as also a tale of revenge. And there's a lot of violence with like garden tools, and I love improvising weapons in my story. So a lot of people get hit in the face with wrenches.
Very, very Cormac McCarthy and his means of killing people through his assassination. Yeah. That sounds like it could be a panel all on its own. The number of themes that you're unpicking in that particular book. We've only got a couple of minutes left. If people have got a question that they absolutely need to ask us, now is the time to do it very, very quickly. Otherwise, I will ask this last one that I can see here. Do you outline your books before writing? So are you basically plotters or are you pantsers, as they say?
The eternal debate. I'm a hybrid. I write long synopsises, so whatever the plural of synopsis is. I write long synopsises to give myself kind of a roadmap. I don't like outlining because I'm lazy, but I also don't like pantsing because I hate writing myself into a corner. So I kind of split the difference. So,
okay, Lloyd.
I outline, but I leave enough space for me to go in there and be innovative along the way. I think that's important. You know the structure, but you want to throw in, an extra body here, or you want to throw in a little bit of complexity there. That works. So that's what I sort of do. I think that outline, sort of a rough outline, works for me, definitely.
I would say I'm definitely a planner. So I have a detailed outline, but I'm not rigid to it. So I can move around it. I like to call it more like a safety net. I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not a pantser because I'll get to 20,000 words and I don't know what my character is doing, where they're going, what they want. So I definitely need an outline.
Well, probably a minute or so left, and so just to warn people, we've been told that we're going to be yanked off screen unceremoniously. So it's like that one of those old cartoons where somebody would be on stage and somebody would have a button and it would open up a pit into crocodiles or sharks underneath. So apparently Steve and Luca are going to do that to us in a second. Just from me, thank you so much. You've really made this panel interesting and intriguing. I've done a lot of panels. I've sat in a lot. I've chaired a lot. And, as I said, this is unique for me because there's never been 3 authors of color, let alone 3 black authors on the same panel before that I've ever seen. And as we've talked about it, we have covered race and diversity, but also, more importantly, all that's come across to me is that you've written wonderful crime novels, and that's what people should be focusing on and taking away from this panel, that it doesn't matter who's writing it. If you like the book, you like the book, and it's all subjective. We all know that. You don't have to like every book just because a person of color wrote it. You can be critical just as you would be critical of a white person's book if you didn't like that book. Nothing wrong with that. We don't mind that. We just wish that the industry was not unconsciously biased against new books being published because they didn't match criteria that are now decades out of date. So that's the last I will say on it. I'll stick that article back up for people who want to read it.
I think at the end of the day, we all just want to write good books and tell good stories and just want everyone to enjoy it. So
and I think equally importantly, when you write a book, you just want to be on an equal playing field. You don't want to be 5 steps behind. You don't want to be 10 steps behind before you've even got off the start. And I think that's where we need to make the improvement there. So
just give us the same chances you give anybody else.
That's a perfect note to end on, I think. So Steve, you can yank us off if you like.